From the moment Aunt Marjorie declared they simply had to use her handmade lace doilies for the altar decor, everyone suspected this wedding might not be perfectly traditional. Still, no one guessed just how unconventional the day would become. Preparations began at dawn, with the bride's mother, Bernice, marching around the hotel corridors, bellowing instructions at the top of her lungs. She had a carefully numbered checklist, color-coded by level of importance, and insisted that each family member sign off on every single task. Because Bernice was unstoppable when she got an idea in her head, the groom's side simply kept quiet and let her run the show. After all, it was only one day. Everyone could survive a few hours of mild chaos. But mild was nowhere near what actually unfolded. As hairstylists fanned out across the bridal suite, the bride, Caroline, sat perched on a stool, trying not to breathe. Her hair was pinned, twisted, and sprayed within an inch of its life, and yet she still managed to look delightfully radiant. Her fiancé, Daniel, was stashed away in a smaller suite down the hall, pacing nervously between a stray ironing board and an open mini-fridge. Though Daniel was famously unflappable on a normal day, known for staying collected even when faced with traffic jams or airline delays, he seemed different now. He'd begun checking his reflection in the mirror every 2 minutes, inspecting his tuxedo lapels and patting his pockets for the ring. Caroline's father, Henry, kept Daniel company, telling long-winded tales of back in my day to keep the tension under control. Meanwhile, in the hallway outside, dozens of relatives hustled to track down missing cufflinks, wrap last-minute gifts, and shuffle extra chairs to the back of the hotel ballroom. A small group of teenage cousins was assigned the task of collecting stray decor items from the trunk of Bernice's sedan. In the flurry of activity, details drifted into the background. Details such as the presence of a particularly mischievous little girl, the designated flower girl who was quietly rummaging around the supply bins. Her name was Maisie, and she was 6 going on 16. She had curly pigtails and an aversion to rules. While every adult focused on final arrangements, Maisie had discovered her lacy, white flower girl basket was the perfect size for carrying treasured odds and ends from the wedding supply stash. The instructions were simple: walk down the aisle scattering flower petals, but to Maisie's mind, flower petals seemed boring. Tiny bits of dried leaves forced to lie limply in her basket? No. She had a better idea. Why limit herself to flowers? There was a whole world of fun stuff to toss. By the time the coordinator finally ushered everyone to their places in the grand ballroom, guests were pouring in. The seats were aligned in perfect rows, facing a small altar, which was adorned with fresh lilies, Aunt Marjorie's doilies carefully draped in the corners. An arch of twinkling fairy lights surrounded the spot where the bride and groom would stand. The wedding party lined up near the ballroom entrance, ready for the processional. The organist tested her keys, the officiant took position, and Bernice frantically gave the thumbs-up sign to each participant. All seemed decidedly calm, except for Maisie, who sported a mischievous grin, hugging that flower girl basket in front of her like it contained hidden treasure. When the music began, the bridesmaids and groomsmen started their slow, elegant march. Each was mindful to step in time, shoulders back, expressions serene. The older flower girls, around 8 and 9, followed suit, scattering a few petals with practiced precision. Then came Maisie's moment. She marched forward with a proud tilt of her chin, the flower basket bobbing at her side. At first, everyone thought she was going to do exactly what was expected. After all, she reached into her basket and tossed something into the air. But it wasn't flowers that fluttered down the center aisle. Instead, rainbow sprinkles, liberated from the containers meant for the ice cream station at the reception, rained down upon unsuspecting guests. Immediate confusion rippled through the rows. People looked at their laps, brushing off sticky bits of pink, green, and yellow sugar from their dresses and suits. A child in the front row giggled and tried to catch the colorful sprinkles on her tongue. The officiant coughed as a stray sprinkle made its way into his mouth. Bernice squinted from the sidelines, trying to determine why the aisle now looked like a birthday cake. But Maisie, triumphant, continued her march. Apparently, that basket contained more where that came from. She reached in a second time with glee, hurling a handful of confetti. Some of the bits of paper soared elegantly. Others clung to the bride's cousin's hair in a messy rainbow display. One of the leftover doilies even rose into the air, drifting like a lacy ghost. The crowd started snickering. A faint murmur indicated that people were more entertained than annoyed. Caroline stood at the back of the aisle, waiting for her cue to appear. She had no visibility into the pandemonium, only hearing the surprised oohs and ahs. Unbeknownst to her, Bernice was behind a massive decorative column, frantically motioning for anyone to intervene. But Maisie was unstoppable. She reached into the basket once more and produced what must have been a carefully stashed bag of glitter, unleashing it in a sparkling cloud that seemed to go on forever. Guests began to sneeze. The best man got a face full of glimmering silver dust. The light from the windows caught the floating particles, casting a disco ball effect across the room. In the midst of the shimmering chaos, Maisie finished her path all smiles, as if everything was going exactly her way. The organist abruptly paused, missing a note as she tried to figure out whether to continue the processional or wait for the chaos to subside. The officiant attempted to restore order, clearing his throat into his microphone. "Welcome, dear friends and family," he began, his voice cutting through the confusion. He tried again, more loudly, but a swirl of confetti got sucked into the microphone, creating a crackling noise that echoed. Someone in the front row suppressed a laugh. Still, the music resumed, and Bernice signaled the bride to enter. Caroline walked in, glorious in her gown, veil draping elegantly around her face. As she gently stepped through the rainbow sprinkles and shining glitter, she realized that the floor felt oddly crunchy under her shoes. Her eyes widened at the spectacle. The guests were covered in confetti, the groomsmen bore looks of mild horror, and Maisie was front and center, beaming proudly. Despite that bizarre start, Caroline managed to make it to Daniel. She shot him an amused look as if to say, "Let's just roll with it." Daniel whispered, "We'll definitely remember this day." The officiant pressed forward, launching into the ceremony text, though bits of confetti still wafted around him. Meanwhile, the best man discreetly picked glitter out of his eyebrows, and the maid of honor tried to scrape sprinkles off her heel. A whisper traveled around the wedding party. What else is Maisie planning? Because if she truly decided to reject flower petals in favor of everything else, there was no telling what else she might have stashed away. They soon found out. Right before it was time for the vows, the officiant asked for a moment of silence, a tradition in Caroline's family. Everyone closed their eyes, bowed their heads, and tried to reflect on the significance of the occasion. But that moment of hush was followed by the sound of a small whoopee cushion. Maisie had inflated a bright pink whoopee cushion where she got it no one knew and placed it on the first step leading up to the altar. When the officiant shifted ever so slightly, he inadvertently set it off. The congregation's heads snapped up and a wave of stifled laughter spread. Bernice's jaw nearly hit the floor. Caroline, not sure whether to laugh or cry, covered her mouth in shock. Daniel attempted to stifle a grinning snort that made his shoulders shake. After a brief attempt at regaining composure, the ceremony trudged on. But that wasn't the end of it. During the ring exchange, the best man let out a nervous squeak. He couldn't find the ring in his jacket pocket. Discreetly patting his pockets, he realized that the ring was missing. Panic flashed across Daniel's face. Caroline tried not to freak out, although the prospect of losing that diamond band, one she had spent months helping design, was enough to send her heart racing. The best man's cheeks turned crimson under the flurry of curious stares. Finally, he patted his back pocket and discovered the ring lodged inside a folded program. Relieved, he held it up triumphantly, and laughter erupted one more time. But in the midst of that laughter, Maisie took advantage of the distraction, rummaging in her basket again. This time, she hurled a handful of small plastic dinosaurs into the air. Seconds later, tiny T-Rexes and Stegosauruses skittered across the altar, pinging against ankles. Guests found themselves looking down at green and orange little beasts, though no one could quite figure out what they were for. The officiant, resigned to the absurdity of the moment, simply cleared his throat again and proceeded with the ring exchange. Yet Daniel practically had to dodge a mini velociraptor that landed near his shiny black shoes. Amid a few muffled chuckles, the groom slipped the ring onto Caroline's finger, and the ceremony pressed on to the pronouncement. Officially married, the couple shared their first kiss, and the officiant presented Mr. and Mrs. Phillips to the applauding crowd. In that moment, confetti still clung to everyone's hair and shoulders, sprinkles and glitter covered the floor, and plastic dinosaurs lay scattered about like confetti from a prehistoric parade. Not exactly the classic wedding photo they'd planned, but undeniably memorable. The bride and groom made their way down the aisle as the guests gave a half-standing ovation. The wedding party followed behind, trying not to slip on the bedazzled tile. Maisie strutted along, still holding her now considerably emptier basket. In the foyer outside the ballroom, Bernice nearly hyperventilated as she repeated, "This is an outrage. I specifically said no inflatable toys, no confetti, no sprinkles." Her sister tried to calm her, but Bernice was inconsolable, exclaiming that she'd never lived down this embarrassment. Unsure of how else to help, the staff quickly ushered everyone to the reception area, hoping that some champagne might lighten the mood. Caroline, stepping in as peacekeeper, insisted that no one blame Maisie outright. "She's just being creative," the bride pointed out with an awkward laugh. Though glints of sparkle still shimmered in her hair, the reception hall, located just a short walk across the lobby, was decked in pastel balloons, silver tablecloths, and rows of elegantly arranged centerpieces. The ice cream station had been meticulously planned, complete with toppings such as crushed cookies, gummy bears, and, ironically, rainbow sprinkles. The same sprinkles now decorating the wedding's aisle. The band played a lively tune as guests filed in. People were still brushing glitter from their cheeks, but the tension began to subside the moment they found their seats and a refreshment in hand. The bride and groom decided to keep the mood light. After all, if a fiasco was going to happen, it might as well be an entertaining one. Still, the question lingered. Did Maisie have anything left in her arsenal? The last thing the wedding needed was for her to catapult a handful of gummy bears at the newlyweds during their first dance. So the family discreetly devised a plan: keep Maisie busy. Daniel's sister volunteered to seat her at the kids' table with some coloring books and crayons. One of the older cousins was assigned the job of making sure the basket stayed empty. Despite everyone's watchful eyes, Maisie managed to slip away several times, each time returning with the hint of a grin that suggested she was hatching more mischief. Dinner arrived with minimal drama. The guests tucked into their salmon or vegetarian pasta, happily ignoring any residual sprinkles that might have migrated onto the tablecloths. Caroline and Daniel used this opportunity to circle the room, greeting and thanking each table. People offered them hearty congratulations, but also teased them about the epic ceremony fiasco. Aunt Marjorie declared it was the most entertaining wedding she'd ever seen and insisted that this was a good omen for a lively marriage. Meanwhile, the father of the groom still had confetti stuck in his mustache, which he either didn't notice or casually chose to ignore. Then came time for the speeches. The maid of honor regaled the crowd with tales of Caroline's embarrassingly disastrous first date with Daniel, when she spilled an entire milkshake on his jeans. Then the best man delivered a comedic tribute to Daniel's comedic misadventures in college, such as the time he attempted to cook a turkey in a toaster oven. Even the bride's mother, Bernice, managed a half-hearted smile during the best man's jokes, though she was still evidently reeling from the fiasco earlier. During these speeches, everyone politely clapped and occasionally howled with laughter. Yee-hee, presence of confetti around the podium looked almost intentional. When the band announced the first dance, the newlyweds took their place at the center of the dance floor. A hush fell, the lights dimmed, and a gentle melody started to play. Caroline and Daniel moved in a slow waltz, gazing into each other's eyes as if no one else existed. The combination of swirling lights and shimmering confetti particles in the air gave an otherworldly effect, like dancing in a magical realm. For a moment, all was blissful. That is, until a small, squeaky voice could be heard from the edge of the dance floor exclaiming, "Cannonball!" Maisie had climbed onto a nearby chair with a handful of miniature beach balls intended for the photo booth. She bounced one high into the air and it landed directly in the middle of the bride and groom's dance, nearly causing them to lose step. The crowd burst into laughter, and Caroline paused in mid-waltz, adjusting her foot to avoid tripping. In that split second, Maisie lobbed another beach ball, reminiscent of those used at a summer pool party. This time, it soared past the couple and smacked the wedding photographer's camera lens, momentarily blocking the shot with bright pink rubber. The photographer, to their credit, recovered quickly and even snapped a photo of the comedic interlude. The guests cheered. Daniel, still holding Caroline, mouthed to her, "Do we just go with it?" Caroline nodded with a grin, and so they continued dancing while pastel beach balls bobbed around them like giant floating bubbles. Shortly after, the band segued into a faster tune, inviting all guests to join in. The dance floor became a circus of swirling dresses, half-empty champagne flutes, and bobbing beach balls that kids and playful adults kept swatting around. Maisie, delighted to see her antics were well received, pranced across the dance floor in her lacy shoes. Though Bernice hovered nearby, likely about to confiscate any item Maisie touched, the rest of the family seemed to have accepted the day's chaotic spirit. As the evening progressed, people eventually tired of chasing beach balls and turned their attention to the buffet of desserts. The top tier of the wedding cake was meticulously displayed on a small pedestal, boasting a swirl of frosting roses. Caroline's friend Paula had baked it from scratch. As the bride and groom stepped up to make the ceremonial cut, a hush fell again. Forks were set down, phones were raised to record the moment. The sparkle from the disco lights caught the silver cake knife. Caroline and Daniel gripped it together, smiling for the cameras. Just as they lowered the knife into the cake, a sudden squeal pierced the silence. From underneath the dessert table, Maisie emerged, brandishing a handful of pink feathers. Exactly where the feathers came from was anyone's guess. Maybe a craft project, maybe a leftover from the decor box. In any case, she released them in a flamboyant flurry, cackling with glee. A few of the feathers drifted onto the white frosting, making it look as if the cake were sprouting neon pink plumes. Bernice shrieked, "No, the cake!" She lunged forward, but it was too late. The delicate top of the cake now wore a fuzzy pink halo. Caroline, in a fit of laughter, tried to brush the feathers away as gently as possible, though the display was forever changed. To lighten the mood, Daniel winked at Maisie and pretended to sprinkle imaginary confetti onto the feathers. The crowd roared with laughter and applause. The bride and groom completed the slicing, lifting a wedge of cake that had only a few stray feathers. Indeed, it was a messy moment, but it somehow encapsulated the day's energy, lively, unexpected, and wholeheartedly entertaining. The festivities carried on, and the band played hit after hit, from oldies that got the grandparents dancing to modern pop that had the teenagers forming a conga line. People mingled at the bar, snapping selfies with the newlyweds, or gathered around the photo booth where they donned silly hats and mustaches. Even Bernice eventually found some humor in recounting the day's oddities to her sisters over a glass of Chardonnay. She insisted, in her typical dramatic fashion, it really is a story for the ages, and though she rolled her eyes, she laughed as she said it. Maisie by now was tired from her spree of unstoppable chaos. She lounged in a corner with her basket, munching on leftover gummies from the candy jar, exchanging them for high fives with the older kids who admired her cool wedding moves. A few guests actually congratulated her on being the best source of entertainment. Meanwhile, the bride and groom made sure to personally thank the wedding staff for handling the spectacle with such grace. The staff, unflappable and experienced, told them they'd dealt with goats in the lobby, wardrobe malfunctions, even an accidental sprinkling of fish food in a past wedding. But a flower girl who tosses absolutely everything but flowers? That's a new one, the coordinator admitted, shaking her head with an amused grin. Friend by friend, guest by guest, the celebration wound down. Some left with confetti still clinging to their hair, others brushed stray feathers off their sleeves. A few small dinosaurs were collected into the flower basket as souvenirs for Maisie. The newlyweds gave out parting gifts, small jars of honey with personalized labels, and the guests reciprocated with warm hugs and heartfelt wishes for a happy life together. In truth, despite the wedding's unorthodox nature, the genuine love and camaraderie in the room was unmistakable. Eventually, the time came for the grand exit. A pair of handsome white limousines waited out front. The plan had been for the guests to line up outside with sparklers. Since the fiasco inside had already covered everyone with layers of confetti and glitter, some guests joked they should simply wave around the leftover doilies or the plastic toy dinosaurs. Caroline and Daniel emerged hand in hand, their clothes still flecked with sparkly remnants. The crowd erupted in cheers. True to tradition, they waved sparklers. Through a haze of smoke and tiny flickering lights, Maisie was spotted next to the bride, lifting one last handful from her basket. This time, to everyone's shock, it really was flower petals. Delicate pink rose petals that fluttered into the night air. The guests collectively erupted with an "ah," moved by the picture-perfect moment. Even Bernice looked touched, though she seemed suspicious about where the real flower petals had been hiding all day. With a triumphant smile, Maisie exclaimed, "I saved the best for last." Then she scampered away, leaving the bride and groom free to slip into the limousine. In that magical final shot, the newlyweds locked eyes, leaning in for a kiss as the wedding party waved farewell. The car pulled away, dragging a string of tin cans behind it. The glitter still shimmered on the pavement, and a stray plastic T-Rex tumbled along the curb. When everyone reflected on the day, they realized there was a certain charm to the madness that surrounded them. No one would ever forget the swirl of sprinkles, confetti, glitter, plastic dinosaurs, and pink feathers. Nor would they forget the unstoppable little flower girl who had marched proudly down the aisle, determined to bring her own flavor of fun to the proceedings. The photos and videos captured it all. The comedic surprises, the mortified expressions, the unstoppable laughter. It may not have been the refined, dignified ceremony Bernice initially envisioned, but in its own way, it was perfect. An authentic testament to the wild unpredictability of family gatherings and the joy that undercuts the occasional chaos. The next morning, as the hotel staff quietly swept up rainbow sprinkles and fished small dinosaurs out of flower arrangements, Caroline and Daniel prepared to leave for their honeymoon. They managed a private chuckle at the idea that their wedding, though a fiasco, had begun their marriage on a note of pure spontaneity and vibrant unpredictability. Before they departed, Bernice found them in the lobby, offering an envelope with a formal apology to the hotel manager, but also giving her daughter a blessedly fond smile. "I suppose if you two can handle today, you can handle anything together," she said, placing one last stray confetti scrap into Caroline's open palm. All three of them laughed, hugging in a final moment of warmth. As they headed out the sliding doors, Daniel and Caroline caught sight of Maisie in the corner, rummaging in her tiny suitcase. She no longer had the basket, but they noticed a few pink feathers peeking out from under the zipper. "Hey, troublemaker," Daniel teased, bending down to ruffle her hair. Maisie frowned in mock indignation, then gleefully gave each of them a hug. "You're welcome, you know," she said, matter-of-factly. "It would have been kind of boring without me." Caroline and Daniel agreed wholeheartedly, patting Maisie on the head before stepping into the taxi. They rode away, feeling equal parts relieved and amused, cherishing the knowledge that while some weddings are praised for their elegance and others for their heartfelt vows, theirs would live in family legend as the day the flower girl tossed everything but flowers, and in the grand tapestry of memories that would weave together, there could be no better beginning than a celebration that sparkled literally with the spirit of joyous, unbridled fun.